Okay, hi everyone. This is Sasha Hodder. We're on the Hodlcast, and we have special guest today, Dan Anderson, or Drop Lister, who I got to know from his creation of the Bitcoin game, which was a lot of fun. But Dan, maybe you can give us a little background.
And myself?
Yes.
Just like an internet rando that been doing blockchain for a long time, I guess, like following it, dabbling with it, trying like more and more stuff as I go, like hackathons, projects, developing for the protocol, the different things I've messed around with, and just kind of, I'm deep down the rabbit hole.
I'd say so, yeah. And like, when did you get involved with Bitcoin?
I don't know if you've ever tried this, but like I searched in my Gmail account for the word Bitcoin.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And I have like a confirmation email from Slushpool in 2011. So like one of the first things I tried to do when I heard about Bitcoin was mine it, which is just like obviously, but yeah, I guess in 2011 I was looking at it. I think I saw it when there was like a news article about it, like Silk Road, you can buy drugs with it, blah, blah, blah. And then I was like checking out the Silk Road and looking at it. And then kind of put it down for a while, but I've been in and out, but like that's when I first saw it. And then I think 2014 is maybe when I more vigorously involved myself. But in 2011, it was like, there was like a Bitcoin talk forum, which is just, even at the time, looks like it's like a garbage, like it's like the default template. Like there's nothing about bitcointalk.org that would make you think anything of note is happening there. It's not like a confidence, like inspiring platform for discussion. So
you went on that, then 2014 you got more involved, and then 2018 you made bitcorns.com. How did you, I guess what is Bitcorns, and how'd you come up with the idea for it?
Bitcoin is a crypto game. Like apparently you can take crypto and put a noun behind it and have a new thing. Crypto art, crypto game, crypto music, whatever you please, right? Crypto collectible. But it's sort of just like my take on, there's like this thing called Rare Pepe that exists. It's on Counterparty that was pretty popular in 2017. And it was always like talked about like that there would be a game, but there never was a game. There was just cards. But there was always like, oh, the game's coming. And so I kind of took a shot at making a crypto game called Bitcoin. And it's sort of like a farming game. Sometimes I'm not sure what Bitcoin is. And I'm not sure how to explain it to normal people, I suppose. I think it's like attracted people that are deep down the rabbit hole. So they're like pre-qualified, they're like experts.
I wasn't an expert, but you helped me figure it out with those videos at the beginning.
You're doing a Bitcoin podcast that puts you deep into the rabbit hole.
Well, actually, the podcast has been like a big learning experience. The smarter people you talk to, the more knowledge you get. So.
Yeah, it's like a fact-finding mission. It's like an excuse to ask questions you can't ask normally.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, I was doing podcasts for a while. It just, man, I like to do everything like kind of. I don't like to commit myself too much to like a schedule. Mm-hmm. So like I'll pump out like 7 in a week and then go dark for another year or something. It's like it. But Bitcoin is like this crypto game, and sometimes it's like it acts like a DAO, like this DAOs these people talk about. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's like a role-playing game. Sometimes it is just a drama machine. It has many different roles, but what I like about it is it's given me a lot of new perspective on. It's a different thing to like try to make a crypto project, than it is to like armchair complain about them.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a learning experience, and I think it's like you learn a lot in terms of like community management. You learn about like it's also like some sort of like weird exercise. It's like going to the gym is like kind of a pain in the butt, but you get like more strong or something. Like kind of running Bitcoin's like a real pain in the butt, but
I was thinking that it's a lot because you have to stay in that chat like 24/7, and you do a great job of it. But I was thinking that a few weeks ago. I'm like, he never gets a vacation off this thing.
well, I'm working on making it stabler. So like I'll to get to get it out, I did some shortcuts where like I fill in the gap with like manual labor, manual touches, and that kind of makes me like a bottleneck. And so the changes I've been making, I have like a new version I'm going to roll out soon that kind of automates me out of some things because I don't want to be like the thing holding it up.
Mm-hmm.
To make it easier for people to like, for example, I set up this Bitcoin Foundation thing, and it'll be easier to get cards like to like have a queue that's like more easily shareable, and because we have this is already like too deep. Like there's trading cards in this game, and people basically make these little PNGs or these GIFs. They issue a token, and they have this crypto collectible such as it is.
But that wasn't there at the very beginning of the
No.
game. When you started it, it was just you had your farm, and I was shocked. I was just doing it. I thought it was cool. I was learning how to use this counterparty for the first time, really. And I loved everyone's art, and I don't know how to use Photoshop or anything like that. So someone made me my art, but it was just fun to scroll through and see, and then it just kept growing from there. You kept adding new features that everyone could do, the co-ops, the locations, all that. And now the
Well,
foundation and
that's
the
what makes it.
cards, all the
That's what makes it like DAO like in a way. Like there's like group participation. It's not like just me working on it.
mm-hmm.
I don't know. People get a kick out of it. What was I gonna say? I'm
And
sorry.
I
I had a long travel day.
Oh yeah. From I look at things always from the legal aspect, and the nature of yours, I think, is part of what makes it so interesting, because it's so many people talk about a decentralized project or things like that that take it away from we don't want to get into too much regulation talk, but the fact that yours has this community that kind of is responsible for what happens on it takes it far away from that Howey test analysis or anything like that. So if I'm ever thinking about a project that comes to me when they're looking at whether or not there's security, Bitcoins is the first thing that comes to mind as how to do it in the right way that's not a security. So it's been I just think it's interesting to watch from that perspective.
Sure.
But
I think a lot of crypto projects operate in a legal gray area, but the laws will eventually change. I think that's generally how innovation happens. Like
mm-hmm.
you have like mavericks go like do things they're not supposed to, and then we find out later it's like good ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Mm-hmm.
But with Bitcoin though, like it was when I first launched it, it was in January when I came up with it. And at that time, the fees on Bitcoin were very, very high. And there were people in the counterparty community who were just panicking in sheer terror that like the fees will forever be $50 or $20, whatever. They always quote this number like $30 a transaction or something like that.
I remember paying 30. I was trying to show my friend at Christmas, gave her first Bitcoin, and I think I gave her like $10 worth, and it cost me $40 or $39 to send it. And I didn't tell her how, like I was looking at him like, ooh, this is a lot. You're talking this thing up, and it doesn't quite work like it's supposed to. But.
Well, I mean, it's sort of like, I mean, my, what I was saying at the time was like, I think this is temporary. Mm-hmm. But all these smart people were saying that like it's just going to go up from here. It's just always going to go up, you know.
Didn't it turn out that that was like Bcashers spamming the network or something that made it go that high for a few weeks? Or was it just because the price was around 20 grand?
I think it was a confluence of things, but like you gotta, I mean, when the price is mooning like that, there's like a lot of demand for transactions now. And that's where you get a fee market, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a supply and demand situation. But the original design of Bitcoin was to really minimize the usage of the blockchain where I could. Right now, it's like super like wide open to make on-chain transactions, so it's fine. But at the time, it was like, all right, like maybe this isn't the end of the world. You can just make it a design constraint, and so like to effectively for me to execute, at least for myself, for the game, you know, not the users who are like also doing whatever they do with cards and stuff, but just for myself, to do these harvests or whatever, you know, it's like 16 transactions or something on chain to effectively do that. So it was just sort of like hey guys, you know, like maybe it's not the end of the world. Maybe you can just do other designs. And this was an example of
How come it's only 16 transactions? Aren't there more farms than that? Like, wouldn't you have to do a transaction to every farm?
So there's a function I use that is what it says on the tin is dividend. But sometimes you can think of it as like a distribution or as a send to many. But basically, one transaction is recorded into the Bitcoin blockchain, but everyone holding it, their balances update. So because the way that Counterparty works is that we kind of like put commands into the Bitcoin blockchain. So like send this, do this. And a lot of the actual activity happens off chain, sort of like implicitly from those commands. So if I put into the blockchain, issue a dividend on this token, you know, all I'm putting is like that information, like give this rate of a dividend.
How set are you on that word? You guys shouldn't be calling them dividends because it creates an image of a security. It should be called like distribution or harvest.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the function is what the function's called. Like,
so that's a counterparty function or just a Bitcoin function? It's
counterparty.
counterparty.
It's part of the protocol, and it just seems. I mean, if a function was called, I think there's what it says on the tin and like the actual use of it. But it's like, I mean, this is like a whole thing right now in these open source projects where people are starting to like search and replace the word like master slave in their code bases because that like reinforces like these relationships and stuff like that. Yeah, it could be renamed. It just doesn't seem like it's worthwhile renaming it.
Mm-hmm.
I get what you're saying though.
So it sends out all the corn with only 16 transactions.
Yeah, there could be thousands of people. It would still just be 16. So
do you think we'll ever get to thousands of people playing?
So what I'm planning on doing is rolling out the new version, which has it's on a better backend. So like I've been releasing these different websites. So I have one called counterpartydex.com or xcpdex.com. It's like a explorer for the counterparty DEX, but it lets you navigate it as if it was like an exchange interface, but it's read only. I don't help you like generate transactions. I just kind of like show you what the market looks like. And then I have a site called DigiRare, which is looking at these, because Bitcoin's not just the only thing on Counterparty. There's like maybe about a dozen, maybe more so, like projects, and it kind of like looks at how they stack up to each other. It's almost like this, like a DApp radar for Counterparty in a way. And they're all running on the same shared backend. And Bitcoin is, in this new version, I'm like plugging it into this shared backend, and it gives me a nice stable setup And once that's out, I'm going to probably start a new round of what we call crop dusting. And that's when you give like somebody like a very small amount of crops to get them like a farm, essentially.
That got me hooked, the special dust
So
magic crop dusting.
So I think we'll probably do another round of crop dusting, which I think will be fun.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of number of users, like some people are like, I don't know, they focus on maybe the wrong metrics, like number of people in the chat room. I don't know if you've been into some of these chat rooms that have like 10,000 members.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like not really clear.
I think you must be able to buy Telegram like people the same way you can on other things, because I see some chats that it's
I agree. I mean, I go into the admin panel and then like I delete like spam accounts end up like eventually they show up as like deleted account. And I just remove them. It affects the number, but like I'd rather have like a real reading. But there's a lot of signs that I think are, I mean, it's like an ebb and flow. Like part of the design of this game is there's like an event every 3 months that it kind of it's an experiment in keeping things like recurring or like just another. Because what I noticed with like Rare Pepe was that like at one point like it was blowing up, like all things were blowing up, right? But if you look now, it's just like it's very low compared to like its peak in terms of activity and everything. And now Ethereum has sort of like copped it multiple different times. There's a couple of Ethereum projects that have basically like copy pasted Rare Pepe's. I mean, and it's not like you can complain that much as like the people making Counterparty Rare Pepe, because Rare Pepe is like stolen from this guy Matt anyways, like the guy that originally made that comic. It's almost like a comeuppance or something. It's like,
yeah. Didn't Joe reserve one card for him or something?
Yeah. But I mean, it's whatever, It's a bummer when people borrow your ideas, but it's also eventually flattering. Eventually it's flattering. At first it's frustrating. Mm-hmm. Eventually it's very flattering.
Have there been any rare, like people trying to steal your ideas with the corn stuff?
I think there's a thing called Mafia Wars that I inspired, but they vehemently deny it, which I think is, again, frustrating, but it is what it is. It's not a big deal. Because in the scheme of things, Counterparty is funny because I think it's like really interesting stuff and it's like understandable. And right now, like on-chain transactions are like wide open. It's so affordable. It really is. Like for what you get for data stored in the Bitcoin blockchain, like the fees right now are unfairly cheap, as Jihan Wu would say. So it's funny because, like a lot of people think Counterparty's dead. It might be dead. I mean, sometimes I think about forking it. It's just, and then it's like, what's that even worth doing? I don't know. I think what's good, what's interesting is about Counterparty is that it's like 5 years in, and there's a lot of things that are way newer than that think that their thing is going to last forever. And so I think in the near future, we'll start to see like what the death of certain projects looks like, deaths of dApps and stuff. Like people will try different strategies. They'll migrate to different blockchains, and that will be like, there'll be a bunch of different ways to migrate. There'll be like a wave of migrations, I would say.
Where do you think they'll migrate from and to?
It depends. Like it depends what their problem was that, like if their problem is that they feel like there's not like a bunch of easy money and liquidity on their blockchain, they'll move to the one that has like the liquidity and the speculative stuff. So like there's this project called Storage that was originally a Counterparty project, and then they migrated to Ethereum. They did like a second ICO. So, what ailed them was probably like lack of liquidity, so they moved. But then there might be, if your blockchain is forking a lot, that instability and that like sort of like if you're trying to build a system on top of another system and the underlying system keeps splitting a bunch, and each time it splits, you have to like understand the ramifications for your system built on top. If that happens enough, you might find yourself looking for a stabler system. There's a bunch of different reasons. You can think of some, but I think I think Counterparty would be super interesting to fork, just because like it's kind of fallen behind in some of its like core infrastructure. Like you get like what's called technical debt. Are you familiar with the term technical debt?
No.
So so when you're doing software development and there's like an issue or like a bug, you might prioritize like something else, and that bug is like on a to-do list. And then like your software moves forward and you start accumulating this sort of like to-do list. And we call that technical debt, because like you got to address it. And like real debt, if you don't, like you kind of like go bankrupt in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But technically like
it like snowballs.
Yeah, like if you're not on top of it, like they compound. And then you have like this, it's like, how do we fix this? Like, what do we prioritize? What do we do first? Like, in what order? And inside of the Counterparty code base, there's been different versions of like how the data is encoded into the blockchain, the different features that exist. And there's a lot of like if-else sort of like commands where it's like, above this block height, do it this way. Above this block height, do it this way. And that's sort of like how it upgrades. And that creates sort of, to me, some technical debt. And what you could do, because Counterparty is not a blockchain itself, it's a ledger computed from Counterparty's blockchain. It's a hard thing to understand if you don't like actually see the code and know what it means. But there's the Bitcoin blockchain where all the data is in, and we're in it kind of like updates over here, like an Excel spreadsheet. You can just consider it an Excel spreadsheet. And there's code that like mitigates that. Technically what you could do though is just snapshot the Excel spreadsheet, the database, the ledger, and plug it into different code.
Okay.
The way I look at it, like you have an option of like slogging through like the technical debt, or you can just go like and start with like a fresh code base that's wouldn't have you get to re-engineer it basically with like 5 years of data, and that would be like a really interesting experiment, I would say.
So that's what would happen with a Counterparty fork? You'd get rid of all the technical debt?
This is the way that I would consider doing it, but I think I think it's just like I'm like, what I like about the blockchain stuff is it's super experimental, so you can try all sorts of crazy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it's like, why do that? And a lot of times the answer is just like, why not? But yeah. I'm sorry, that was a tangent, but
no, it's interesting.
What would you like to talk about, Sasha?
Well, I've seen you tweeting a lot about side chains lately, and I was kind of hoping you might be able to shed some light on those for me and the viewers. Kind of like a high level overview, what they are, why they're useful, what they have to do with anti-fragility.
Okay, so a side chain, the idea is rather than creating a new coin, so rather than making Ethereum, is it possible to create a different chain or a different piece of software that uses the Bitcoin in a different context? So a lot of like the justifications for making new blockchains is that Bitcoin doesn't do what I want it to do. It's just internet money. This is one of the funnier refrains that some people make. They're like, oh, Bitcoin, it's just internet money. Like, how boring. It's weird. It's like, a very strange claim. But the idea is, how can we use Bitcoin under different conditions, but still be using the same 21 million Bitcoins? So with Bitcoin Cash, right? They split, but now you have 42 million Bitcoin essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to do things like that, but only have like the 21 million Bitcoin? Does that make sense? This is like
Yeah.
the impetus is part of this. So it's like a door number 3. Like it's like you can snapshot fork Bitcoin, which is like you can like fork Bitcoin, which is like Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Platinum, Bitcoin Private, Bitcoin whatever.
Diamond, all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a door. Or you can start a whole new blockchain, and that's like another door. And is there this like other third door where we can just use Bitcoin in a different context? So that's the idea of a sidechain.
Okay, that's different. That's different than how I understood it then. So what I thought it was that all the transactions would be gathered in some other side chain that might not interact with the blockchain, and then they all get sent at once, like in a giant batch, compared to every transaction going through. And I thought it kind of shook them up so that no one can see maybe I'm sounding ridiculous explaining this, but I thought it made it more private, basically. So someone like Chainalysis couldn't look at a transaction and see who did what.
Okay, you're not totally wrong. So like that is an example of like one thing you could do with a side chain. There's this thing Drive Chain that Paul Sports has been like fighting for a long time. It's very frustrating to champion changes to open source projects, especially these blockchain projects. It's not like contributing to regular software. It's extremely contentious.
I saw him and Timon going at it a couple months ago.
I would, if anyone was interested in contributing to these projects, what I would recommend is to do it anonymously. I think I mean, personally, like I'm pretty public about myself because like I think I'm not going to delude myself to think that like there is anything like real privacy on the internet. Like we live in this like surveillance internet culture, right? So I don't like myself the false sense of security that like because I'm behind a username I'm like private. Mostly people are protecting like their egos with their usernames more than like their true identity. Like there's people that can figure them out if the system is surveilled. But I would recommend doing it anonymously, to be honest. But let me explain to you Drive Chain because it will get back to the way you understand it.
Okay.
So Drive Chain is Paul's attempt to implement sidechains. So sidechains are like this idea, and like cryptocurrency is like an idea, and Bitcoin's like an implementation of it. So sidechains are this idea, and Drive Chain is like one way to do it. There's other ways to do it, but Paul's way is this particular way. And what Drive Chain focuses on is if we have Bitcoin, the main chain, and I'm sorry if this is like,
no, it's good.
Explain. Okay. So if we have Bitcoin here, it's like a chain, just think of this as the chain. And we have over here the side chain. What Drive Chain focuses on is like the in-between. So going to and from. And you can kind of think of it as creating like a hook or an on-ramp and an off-ramp.
And so, what would be the reason to go between the two chains?
Okay. Well, I think of the Drive Chain as being like the bridge. And if you can separate the idea of like, for me, when I think about the Drive Chain stuff, what's exciting about it is that it enables kind of you to do any side chain you want. It's not really important to Drive Chain the sort of hook, like what you're plugging into. It's what's important about what it does is it allows you to lock up Bitcoin in a side chain and get it back. And then what you do with it is up to you. And that's what makes it like very innovative is what you do in the side chain is really up to you. It's like, so I think of these two things separately, but most people kind of mash it all together. So like, I know this is not helping. So with the drive chain design, basically what you do is you kind of like announce your side chain, and a side chain from like somebody not really paying attention to what the side chain is, like it's just like an address with a balance. So like there's like an address, a Bitcoin address with like 1,000 Bitcoins. That's the entire balance of that side chain.
Okay.
Okay, so it's like
there could be hundreds of people in there, but it's just going to take a tally of the total.
Yeah, so they call that like an escrow account essentially, and then that money is locked up in such a way such that the side chain sees people make deposits, and now they get over here like +1 Bitcoin. So if you deposit a Bitcoin into this escrow account, the sidechain software should respond to that and +1 over here. Okay. But it's up to the sidechain what it wants to do with that actually. So it's not really that important to the drive chain setup, what's done over here. Maybe you should ask me some questions because I feel like I'm meandering.
Okay. So I took a few questions off your Twitter, and so what do Bitcoin developers mean when they say do it in a side chain?
Yeah, that was a point I made the other night. Twitter's Twitter, just to be clear. Like Twitter's for ranting and like being stupid. I think if you can't have fun on Twitter, like I guess apparently you have to pay $40 million to the SEC if you want to have fun.
Yeah,
on Twitter,
no
right?
kidding. That's awful. Poor old Elon.
Yeah, such that.
Poor old Elon, you know. But still.
But I mean, Twitter is Twitter. But like in 2014 and 2013, there was a big debate about on-chain stuff and like op return stuff. And is it spam? Is it not spam? And there's a lot of times the refrain from the Bitcoin developers was that like, you know, you can always just do that in a side chain. And side chains were like not a thing. Like they were like a theoretical thing. Mm-hmm. You know, so the way that it was deployed, I'm reading this into it, but it's sort of like, you know, if I'm working on what I want to work on, and that's like my vision of Bitcoin, and you come nag me about, you know, you with the crazy things you want to do, it's like, oh, you know, go do it in a side chain.
It's like if people started at you with Bitcoin, like do this, do that, you say, oh, just build it over there in a side chain.
Yeah. But like at the time, they're like theoretical, and they're still like theoretical things. So it's, to me, it very much sounds like just like kind of go to hell, this like theoretical place. Because like you can't, you know, it's like you can't really.
Bitcoin has such a funny language. Like, oh, go do it in a side chain. Who else does that mean? Oh, go to hell. But to us,
that's my interpretation of it. I guess, and it might be wrong, but you know, there's a lot of, that's how I view it. But now that side chains are becoming like, I think what's really funny too is like there's Ethereum has like all of a sudden like they think they have side chains down. Like they're like, oh yeah, we figured that out. Like anytime there's like a thing in Ethereum, like they're like, yeah, like we figured that out. And then you look into it and you ask about it, and it's never actually like, you know, what they say it does. Like they'll just take a buzzword and then they'll be like, we figured it out. We did it. And then you're like, where's the code? And they're like, nah, it's like private code. We're not releasing it. It's like, well, how does it work? And it's like, oh, well, don't ask questions. This is the experience of asking hard questions in Ethereum land.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then the other thing I was wondering, what do you think is the demand for off-chain transactions in the next couple years?
Yeah, that's so that the context of that question is from my Twitter, where you know part of the sort of like response from Bitcoin developers is like some of them is they really don't want you to be using the blockchain for anything other than sending Bitcoin. They don't really like when you use it for like to build a different protocol on top of. I guess unless it's Lightning Network or something, and that's like authorized, you know.
That's approved usage.
Yeah, like you see the Bitcoin developers talk about Lightning as like a feature of Bitcoin. It's like a new feature of Bitcoin. But like there's no like they have a process called like the BIP process, and there's like no BIP for it. And it's just like another project that's using Bitcoin. It's not like a feature of Bitcoin. It's like a use of Bitcoin or something like that. It's not part of the core code. It's just like a use of Bitcoin. But like Counterparty is like a use of Bitcoin. But like you'll never ever see them say like, oh, Counterparty is like a feature of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
It's a funny Bitcoin thing that happens there. But it does seem to me that we need demand for on-chain transactions to secure the network. We need transaction fees in Bitcoin to secure the network. The block subsidy is not forever. It is like diminishing. And eventually, the untested, unproven thing is that the transaction fees will support the security of the network. That is a untested, unproven claim.
And we don't have that long to make sure there are enough transactions going that's going to be, worth that the fees will create enough incentive for people to keep running the nodes or keep mining, right? Or
Yeah,
they wouldn't be mining at that point, but
well,
they still.
they'd be mining. They'd be
Okay.
mining for the fees, essentially.
Okay.
Like that's what they'd be mining is fees.
Mm-hmm. So has anyone done any studies, I wonder, on like how many transactions we're at today versus this time last year versus the time before to put out some kind of projection of how many transactions we'll be at 2040? It's probably impossible to project, all
Well,
projections are
the
usually
number of
pretty
transactions that fit inside a Bitcoin block are known.
okay.
There's like it's like around on average a block is a transaction is like 250 bytes. But like so like whatever 1 megabyte divided by 250 bytes is,
Mm-hmm.
that's probably like the upper limit on transactions in a block. But we need over time keep those transaction fees to amount to more than just like dust. Like you want to see there become a fee market.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now, I think the strategy of the Bitcoin developers is that Lightning will address these issues by creating this layer 2 network of transaction activity where a lot of the transactions that occur between parties locally, subjectively, or whatever, not everyone needs to know about those. So you can do a lot of changes in your balances between each other, and then you can settle to the chain less frequently. And you can sort of like that system would be probably good in a high fee environment because like say you do like 100 transactions off chain and then you settle.
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of divide the transaction fee by like 100 transactions and kind of consider it amortized or whatever you call that. Not amortized, but you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think amortized makes sense for that.
It'd be like the effective fee would be, effectively you'd be paying a very small fee, but you'd be paying it like in lumps,
Mm-hmm. And who would pay it? So the person running the Lightning node would have to pay it and then attribute it backwards to all of the transactions or collect it ahead of time for every transaction. Or maybe they set some kind of schedule, like if it's really active, every 20 minutes, we're going to put it onto the chain. And so everything that goes through there then gets put on, or I don't know.
You basically settle when you're either done with the interaction, or you're like uncomfortable with the liability, basically. So if you're starting to feel like, like you owe me, this much money, and like I would just like to, settle that now. It's like being at a bar and like you're buying drinks and rounds and stuff, and you're just like, sometimes you just go to the bartender and you're like, I want to close my tab or pay my tab and maybe open a new tab, but like you would close it when you were sort of like uncomfortable, I think.
Okay.
But they don't, like, the settlement or whatever wouldn't reference anything. It would just be like, if me and you are in a payment channel and I send you $5, you send me $10, whatever, we do that a bunch. Because that's happening off chain, no one really needs to be knowing about all that. Like, they just need, the chain will just see that at the end of the day, like maybe you ended up with $10 and I ended up with $15. Like,
but what if, like, for a bigger scale, what if I am Starbucks and you're, how would a channel work? Like, it would be Starbucks to Coinbase or something like that? Like, or Starbucks to every individual customer? Like, two people have to run the channel though. So how would the customer get onto that channel?
And I mean, in the scenario you described, like, there's no reason for Lightning there. Like, if you're doing Coinbase to Starbucks, it's just like a, within Coinbase, you would just do that transaction, I would think. You wouldn't even use the chain. It would just be like updating the database.
Okay, so if we were to get to a point where, as a society, people can use Bitcoin or cash for a lot of different transactions, they don't need to put every transaction on the blockchain already. Like, there's payment networks that they can, like, say they are using Coinbase, they would just put, it would be a one transaction to get the money onto the Bitcoin onto Coinbase, and then from Coinbase to Starbucks, that wouldn't go on the blockchain. So I would think it would have to, for it to leave your Coinbase account and get added to the Starbucks account. So then if we get a $30 transaction fee, no one's going to be able to do that. But if we have the Lightning Network or some kind of payment channel that makes all day of transactions happen off the chain and then settle at the end of the day or something, it could handle the fees. But then that would take away, like, that incentive for fees later on down the road in 2040, if we set it all up that way.
Well, if there was a lot of, so like in theory, if there was like a bunch of activity on the Lightning Network, like you would have the fees will, if there's a bunch of activity on the Lightning Network, it should create a fee market sufficient. But the Lightning Network, it's got like a liquidity problem. Like, you need to, if my understanding of the way it will work, if it's successful, because it's not really like a, what do they call it, like a fait accompli or whatever. Like, it's not like, well, there's like a fancy word I can't pronounce, but it's not like fated.
Fait accompli.
That it will be like, it'll work, like, so there, I think that there's a lot, maybe too much eggs in that one basket in terms of like scaling solutions. That's why I like this possibility of having side chains as like an alternative. But I think the way the Lightning Network would work at scale, you would have like hubs. You would have like very well connected liquid hubs. Like, how like a Chase Manhattan Bank is like a very popular correspondent bank because they have like a large network, right? So I think you would have hubs like that where the one way to think about it, Sasha, is like, how you were talking about Starbucks and Coinbase and like opening the channel, closing the channel. I think there's probably an incentive to open only like one channel if you can, and you open that channel with like somebody that is like majorly connected to other people, because through your connection to them, you can kind of like route to other people that they're connected to.
Okay.
So if me and you are in a channel and that's the only we're not connected in any other way to anyone else in the Lightning Network, that's the extent of like our liquidity pool and our like counterparty options, you know. But if we are connected to a large hub, right? Like even if we're not directly connected, if you're just like also using like Venmo, you know, like, or something like that, it'd be like that, where we're not strictly connected in a payment channel, but you're part of this large network hub too. And so we can pay each other through these like routes that they have. I think there might be many hubs. There might be just one hub. Might be one big hub. There might be like, there'll be like specialized, but I think it's all about hubs, and people think that's like centralization or whatever, but that's overblown, I think.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where the direction you'd like it to see is for it to have multiple hubs, or
I don't like this. I don't have any preference for how the Lightning Network works. It's just, it seems like it needs a lot of liquidity.
Yeah.
And it needs a lot of interconnectivity. And that is not necessarily like a given. And until there's like very compelling uses of Lightning, you won't really see that capital accumulating, I would say. You know, there's like Satoshi Pixels or whatever that thing was, like, that's not it. Like, that's not the thing that's going to get a lot of money in there. You need probably things like derivatives trading, or like something like just like degen bets, you know, like you need that kind of stuff to really start accumulating these, for there to be this incentive to do these things. But right now it's like, you know, if you wanted to do stuff like that, because I've looked at it a little bit with some people, and I know some people in New York City that have like very compelling ideas for its use, but almost always the issue is liquidity. You have to lock up a lot of capital, and there needs to be a lot of demand, I think, personally.
And is the capital safe in there? I've heard arguments either way, like that, yeah, it's super safe to put your money in a Lightning or your Bitcoin in a Lightning payment channel to provide liquidity. But then I've seen other things where people say it might not be super safe.
So they're still working a lot of things out, and it's like, it is a kind of a complicated system. So one of the things that I like about Bitcoin is, even though it's like complicated, like you kind of can grok it. And this guy, Nick Szabo, calls that like social scalability, like the thing that used to be like comprehensible. Now and I know you want to talk about Mimblewimble, but that also might be an issue with Mimblewimble, is it's very hard to comprehend. So it's like, you do need some level of shared understanding to like build a network. So right now they're making changes frequently. I think it's really smart though. Like it's technologically, like it's sound, but it's like they have a chicken egg problem. I think like you can't. It's hard to just like announce like network effect. You know, you don't just get that. You need to build the network effect. That's why I see it being like a very large bet. But I hope that helps.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Does that make sense though? Like if you think about it as like why, think about it in like terms of like corresponding banking. Like there's like winners in those, like in that ecosystem, you know, like if you have a choice between Chase Manhattan Bank to like get your money to like somewhere in Africa, or like your local credit union, like which one's gonna like service that best? It's probably gonna be Chase Manhattan Bank. And so like they have a network effect to their, you know, and I think they'll be very dominant hubs. You know, it looks to me that way. Like I think, or you could think of things like the Google app store or like iTunes app store, right? Like, why does what's the pitch of like the Apple Store to a developer, right? It's like, if you put your game in my store,
People will see it.
You'll gain access to all the people using our phones, our network, and it'll be very easy for you to accept payments through our Apple Pay, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the gambit. And I think that will be what the hubs look like on Lightning Network if they're successful. You will plug your application into that hub, be inside of their app store, because that hub is super well connected, meaning it'd be easy for people to pay you. Not everyone has to open up. You get rid of that friction of like having to open a channel with you, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then, it'll be easy for paying.
And will that hub, obviously people, only do things when they're incentivized to do it. They'll make a cut off every transaction, or what creates the hub incentive?
Well, it'll be difficult to bootstrap these kinds of things. So what you could see, and this is again is capital intensive, and this is not an idea that I've come up with, but there's a gentleman, I wish I remembered his name, but he tweeted about this, where you can have negative fees in Lightning Network. You can pay people to route through you. And this is like how PayPal became popular. Like, remember that there was a time where if you made an account, they'd give you free money.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's like how they like got up and going. And so you could actually make a hub where if people route through you, you push their money through your route, and you kind of like bump it a little bit.
Okay.
So you could actually create an incentive financially to route through you, which will further entrench you. It's really interesting, and I think there's going to be, if it works, I think it's going to be super, super interesting. But like, I imagine a successful Lightning Network to look like an app store in a way.
Mm-hmm. That does make that you painted a picture for me that I can see more clearly now. So thank you.
Yeah, I could be wrong. That's the way I think about it. There has to be compelling reasons to, and sidechains suffer from this issue as well. You need to have a compelling reason. Like, so what's compelling about when I started talking about door number 1, door number 2, door number 3, what's compelling about like starting a new blockchain or like joining a new blockchain is the sort of like Ponzi allure of like being in early when it's cheap for the chance to sell higher later. It's like something pops off. Lightning Network doesn't have that allure because we're not making a new token. We're just using Bitcoin in a different way. So the allure has to be some sort of value add to the user. I think that's a fair thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so the value add that is led often in the discussion is that you will save transaction fees, right? That's kind of the pitch.
And today that might not matter so much, but if we get back to, a spot where transaction fees are $30 a transaction or something, we'll really see Lightning and sidechains take off.
It's true, but it is kind of, I don't know if it's ironic or tragic or what, but like, the fees are on the floor. So, it's like all this work to save fees, and it's like, I don't mind paying fees. They're super cheap. Maybe that's just me,
Now, could you use them? So if say fees went to like $100 transaction, if we got to $100,000 price of Bitcoin, maybe that's possible for fees to be $100, because when we were at 20 grand, fees were actually at $40. So, I don't understand the correlation of price to fees, but I think it's something, we won't know until we're there. And so for Bitcoin, could you use a sidechain or Lightning to put all 16 transactions into one fee on the blockchain?
I think counterparty will always be set up how it is, like, um, for a number of reasons. But like, to put Counterparty on a side chain is possible. However, getting back to my personal view is that you need to have like a compelling reason to use that side chain. And I think the side chain for assets that was sort of like started at zero, like empty, and had like would have this draw of like a homesteading, you know. I think that side chain would be much more attractive and compelling than the one which is like essentially like pre-mined and there's like already like all the good assets are taken, you know. So I think for that, almost for that reason alone, if you are going to go through the trouble of trying to make a side chain, which is super hard, you would rather start fresh to create that incentive for like crazy people to get in early.
Okay. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years with this then.
Sure. I feel like every time I say something, I say nothing. It's very frustrating.
No. It's complicated stuff.
There's information being relayed.
I think it's very good, Dan. Thank you. And do you want to give Mimblewimble a shot too?
Sure.
Okay. So yeah, I kind of learned about Mimblewimble a year ago. I'm in a chat with this guy, Sean Leary, started in Jacksonville Bitcoin. And one of the other guys, Eric, in there, we were talking a lot about taxes around, last November, December, and Mimblewimble came up as a way that, it just basically a way to obfuscate the ability for anyone to see your transactions. And then he sent me a couple of videos on it. I didn't learn that much about it, and then I didn't hear about Mimblewimble until about a month ago. Started hearing bits and pieces of it here and there, and seems like there's been some developments with it like now, and I still don't understand exactly what it does. I think you did send me a very good explanation of it, that basically it just it makes the transactions, it basically erases the chain is kind of how I understand it. Like I could send you a transaction and that chain would then get erased afterwards, so there's no record of our transaction.
I think I probably explained it poorly then.
It's not you.
I'm not a cryptographer. I'm just the internet rando. But my understanding of Mimblewimble is it's a clever combination of cryptography. So there's this thing called confidential transactions. And this is an idea, I think Gregory Maxwell came up with it. And so in confidential transactions, you don't announce how much money you're transacting, the value of the transaction. But what you provide is proof that you have not like made money out of thin air.
Okay.
And so, yeah, you don't broadcast the amount, but you do broadcast enough information that everyone can agree and come to consensus on the fact that like you had ownership of that value and you didn't create new value. And that's like a crypto trick that like it's very hard to
prevents
drop.
The double spend too. Like the double spend is still built in there.
Right. And then there's this other idea called coin join. So you can create a specialized transaction and you have to do it like you have to like collude with other people to make one, but basically, or like we can agree on an amount of money. So like say 0.1 Bitcoin, and we're going to do a coin join transaction. And so we kind of like combine a series of transactions, but each one is sending the same amount. And when you make a transaction like that, you just see like, one Bitcoin in, and 1 Bitcoin out. And since everyone got the same amount, it's really not clear who's sending what to who.
Okay.
And so that's called a coin join. And you can see how that kind of makes some sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we agree on this amount, it creates a lot of ambiguity about actually who is sending to who. So those two things come into play. But Mimblewimble is basically this other design for a blockchain. And it relies on cryptographic tricks like this. But essentially, there's the information that would be like, it basically, it hides the amounts being transacted. But there's information that's like not like hidden. So like the amount of coins minted in the block, that's not like hidden, that's like known. The transaction fees, those are like known. So if you know, like if I think Grin is like trying to implement this, and so their block reward I think is static. So let's just say every block is like 10 Mimblewimble coins, right?
Okay.
So if that's a property of your blockchain, and the block height is 1,000, you can know that 10,000 coins have been minted. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just like, if that's the case, that each block mints this many coins, you can know what the supply is at that block height, right? Mm-hmm. And so knowing that, and using this crypto stuff, essentially the thing that they check is that, and it's a very tricky thing, without revealing these values, what you can do apparently, it's basically looks like magic, but you can prove that like 5 coins went in, 5 coins went out, right? But that's not really what they check for. What they check for is if you sum up this crypto stuff, which is just numbers, like large numbers, as long as they sum to 0, we can know that no coins were generated out of thin air. You know? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the transactions happen, and you kind of have to trust the cryptography to know that the certain amounts were sent back and forth, and only the individuals that sent it and received it are going to know the exact amount.
That's right. And so like there's like when you make a transaction or whatever, like apparent I'm not an expert in this. This is my understanding. You prove basically 2 things: that when you sum up the inputs and the outputs, you get 0, mm-hmm. right? It balances. And you also prove that there's no negative values. So like if your test is to make sure that things just add to 0, right? You could be tricky, and you could say like you could do like an input of 5 and an output of 10 and -5.
Okay.
And that would actually sum out to 0, but you would have just minted 5 coins. Mm-hmm. So you prove that there's no negative values, and you prove that it sums up to 0. And that's what a transaction looks like. And then their blocks are different because like the aggregation of these transactions itself just looks like a big transaction. Because it's just like about the inputs and the outputs adding to 0. So if you just stack them all up, it just looks like a bigger transaction, to be honest.
And is this going to be with Bitcoin, or is Grin its own separate coin?
So it's so under development that I think they have a lot of things up in the air. It's an example of something you could do with a sidechain, though, if you felt like it. I think. I might be wrong, but also because they have this fancy math or whatever, you could like take this big list of transactions, and some of them will cancel out in a way and have no meaningful effect to the end state because they're like a mid state. So there's like some canceling, and that reduces the amount of information you need to save. It's really super interesting. I mean, it's pretty clever, but it's going to suffer like all new blockchains do, like getting a network.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that isn't.
And is it going to be something like where, so they've said with other privacy coins, a big challenge is when you move into them, like if you're known, like if your address has been known linked to you, and then you buy the privacy coin, that privacy coin is still linked to you, whether it's private or not. Is there going to be some way to buy this without, if it's like my Bitcoin address is known by, anyone looking at the blockchain over time, that it can be linked to me?
Maybe.
If I go into Mimblewimble, they'll know, okay, she moved a Bitcoin into that. At the end of the day, she's still got a Bitcoin. I think that's always a challenge on these things. So hopefully they figured it out too.
But if you're doing like a one-way move and you're just like adopting Mimblewimble, like what do they really know besides like you just disappeared? Like, you're like a missing person, and like that's known, but like they don't really know where you are. Like 10 Bitcoins has gone missing, but like that's the extent of what they know.
Okay.
Right? Don't you think? Like if I know you, Sasha, put 10 Bitcoin into a Mimblewimble or whatever, and like I know that, like beyond that, now it's like in this, it's just
black hole.
Yeah. So,
but from a tax side of things, anytime you move from one coin to another coin, so if this is its own coin, at the time that you purchased it, you would have a taxable event on your Bitcoin. Like you would have sold your Bitcoin, have to pay on your cost basis at whatever you bought that Bitcoin. And then it starts over with Mimblewimble. Maybe they can't see the sell side of that, but
my response to that is just like pay your taxes. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not concern of the protocol. But yeah, there's definitely like issues like, so actually, and you sent me some show notes. So we want to talk about Dandelion because it kind of like addresses some things about this.
Okay.
It is about like making Bitcoin more anonymous and less trackable. What have you heard about Dandelion?
Well, I listened to Andres talk about it today, and it's been a long day, and since then I can't remember much, but I got the impression of taking a dandelion and blowing on it and seeing all the pieces go apart. Like that's kind of the mental image that it gave me.
That is why it's named that, yeah. But like, so when you make a transaction, you like announce it from your node or from a node. So you kind of like put it into the mempool. And that node has an IP somewhere. Like that machine exists somewhere with an IP. And so the way that things work now is like a transaction is just sort of, there's like a mempool phase of a transaction, and you kind of just like blast it out to other nodes around you. And if somebody is like monitoring the network, they can kind of, if they have enough nodes or whatever that are like colluding with them, they can kind of deduce which node that transaction came from. So even if you just do like a shotgun blast to a bunch of nodes all at the same time, the networks aren't like perfect like that. Like things take time, and so you can kind of like work backwards and know like, okay, this transaction came from this node at this IP address, which might lend some information to somebody that you don't want to have. For a lot of people, that's probably not a big deal, but for some people, it's probably no bueno for like it to be obvious where the transactions are coming from. That makes sense to some degree?
Yeah.
And so Dandelion is a proposal to impose or to have a new protocol for the propagation of transactions. And rather than doing that just like a shotgun blast thing, that's the poof, right? They introduce a stem phase. So there'll be the stem phase and then the mempool phase. And so rather than broadcasting the transaction, what you would do is you would send your transaction to another node, just one other node, and you would like give it to that node and be like, look, this transaction is in stem phase. And they'd be like, cool, I know what to do with that because it's a protocol and there's rules. But basically what that node would do is they would flip a coin, and if it's heads, they will broadcast it and do the poof.
Okay.
If it's tails, they will pass it on to one node and let them know, hey, this is in stem phase.
Okay.
And then they'll flip a coin. And so
there's no way to know in that situation who the initial transaction was, because it could go 5 times before getting a tails, or it could go 1 time before getting a tails. So they can't know where it came from. That's cool.
I'm sure there's still a way, but it makes it way harder.
Yeah.
Because it'll kind of be like Underground Railroad, and then it goes above ground or something.
Yeah.
And it has some assumptions that like everyone's actually truly following that protocol. But it just makes it harder. You know, there's a lot of really smart things that the Bitcoin developers do. They don't get enough credit for it, that are just like little wins.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of like a big win, but it's not like you might be like, why don't we just use like Tor style onion routing?
Yeah, I say that all the time. Just kidding.
I feel like I'm being bullied. I'm just kidding. But like it's hard to do that, and this is sort of like a simple solution.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you understood it after I explained like the coin tossing thing. Like it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like passing notes before you like announce it.
Yeah, it's like the teacher found it at the 5th person or something.
Where'd this come from?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'm just passing.
Then they can look at the handwriting and figure it out, maybe. But
it would just add a lot more entropy to the network. So like you want to make things less predictable, and this would be a way to do it. That's not crazy to implement, and even if it's not perfect, it'll be better than like things now. But that's
how would you get to use Dandelion?
How do you mean?
Like, how could I use it?
So it would be like something that would get like just dropped into Bitcoin if they adopted it.
It'd be like a SegWit kind of thing?
No, it'd just be like an optimization of the node software that maybe like in a future version, they would just update the nodes to follow this protocol. And not all the nodes would upgrade to it. But it wouldn't be...
Because would some people like maybe be resistant to doing it because the government might look at this and be like, well, we want to be able to see these transactions, so don't, like a company that has a big link with the government, like say Coinbase or something like that, they might not want to implement something like this because they're being told not to.
I mean, it's, if they want to be a part of the network, that's like, I don't know. It's just a different.
Once it gets implemented, they have to.
I mean, it's just a different way. I mean, I don't think that's really. I wouldn't worry about that, is all I would say.
Okay. Yeah. All right, cool. Well, thank you, Dan, so much for all that great information. Where can people find you?
I'm pretty much at Droplister everywhere. DROPLISTER. I'm on Twitter as Droplister.
And how do people join the? Well, I should put a plug out for the Quarantine Clan. So if anyone wants to join our Bitcoins game that Dan brilliantly came up with, we have. So there's different co-ops, and
well, tomorrow's a big day. Tomorrow's a harvest.
Yeah.
That'll be fun.
Mm-hmm.
That would be fun. So tomorrow's a big day, busy day. I think I'm probably going to go to bed after this and wake up early so I can be ready for it.
Yeah.
But so at Droplister, check. You can Google Bitcoins, Bitcoin.
Bitcoins.com.
Yeah. For the 3 people that made it to this stage.
Yeah.
You were like criminally under listened to. It's a shame.
Well, I think it's, I don't know. I don't know what, there's probably lots of things you can do to market yourself on YouTube that I don't do, but, but it's all for the love of learning about this stuff.
Sure.
Mhm.
All right. Well, just a note about the things I said about Mimblewimble, Lightning, and sidechains or whatever is that I could be wrong, and I don't want to mislead anyone or give them. So, like, do your own research.
Always.
I know we're ending, but the thing I want to say about drive chains and side chains and why they are so cool is a lot of people that are pearl clutching about minor centralization, and their argument is almost paradoxically, I'm saying that word wrong, but like centered on this idea that like the reason we shouldn't have side chains or drive chains is that they'll become so popular that miners will have to care about them. That's like their concern. And it's really weird. It's like, we can't have this thing because it'll be so successful. That is their argument. And it's kind of not a good look.
What do you mean not a good look, like on the people making the argument?
Yeah, I don't know. Do you want a Bitcoin like leadership that is like their position is we can't have this thing because it will be too successful? That's a weird position to take.
Mm-hmm.
But they call it minor centralization, but like it's weird.
And with just like what we've seen of human ingenuity, if we got to that point where it was too successful and there wasn't enough incentive to keep securing the Bitcoin blockchain, there'd probably be something built to fix that, as it was approaching a danger zone.
I'm sorry to keep keeping your time. Sorry, but no. Think about like side chains, right? Like my view is that side chains are going to be super hard to stand up. So like a lot of side chains will like not make it. Like they will not be economically justified. Their existence will just not be justified. And if you were to have a side chain that was successful and had a lot of demand, the miners that like merged mined it or cared about it, they would generate a little bit more profit than the miners who don't.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And the concern that people have about this is that these miners will become like runaway profitable to the other miners who don't care about the side chain. But if there is such a side chain, this golden goose of a side chain that is just like making everyone money, of course you would fucking mine it. Mm-hmm. And if it's justifying its existence through this economic activity, like it's going to be good for Bitcoin. It's not going to be bad for Bitcoin, I think. But there's, people are extreme in their views, and, they want to preserve some idealism of like, I don't know. They want everyone, like there just aren't like normal people mining already. Like, but to have this, they're literally concerned about a successful side chain just being this like economic like wonderkin that like kills the network somehow. It's really weird. It's a really weird position. I get to a degree what they mean, but when somebody says minor centralization, they often don't define it. And Paul has a really funny thing about this. If you replace miners with Jews and like read the statement, often it's like a weird prejudice apparently with it really is. A lot of times the way people talk about miners, it doesn't really make sense. Like it's often like a really radical position that they're having.
Okay.
People are basically afraid of miners is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
But miners are just trying to make money. Sorry. No, this is just now tangent.
No, I'm thinking about it more. I never heard, I didn't know the nuances of that argument.
Mm-hmm. You see where they're coming from, though? Like if a side chain is like profitable to mine, the miners that mine it will make more profit. The miners that don't will make less profit. And so it will be like mandatory to mine that side chain. But that's a market effect. And if it happens, it means that side chain has improved the value significantly of Bitcoin. Its value proposition has been improved, and it's a good thing, I would say.
Okay.
And this is why I think it make more sense, my claim, or what I was saying earlier about people are like afraid of success, essentially.
Yeah.
They're also afraid of failure too. So like side chains will fail. And I think that's a good thing. The side chains are like this gauntlet that will just punish all the bad ideas. And some people may lose funds in that worries people. We have like a very like the Bitcoin developers are like, oh no, people might lose money or whatever, because there is a security trade-off. It's a different security setup, but people should be able to make the trade-offs they want. Like they shouldn't be, I think, and people are already making trade-offs in terms of their security. Like people choose to trade on centralized exchanges. People choose to trade their Bitcoin for shitcoins. People choose to degen bed. Like people choose hardware wallets or they leave it on Coinbase. People are making all these choices anyways. And so rather than just telling people like, no, Bitcoin's this, it's this thing, you could say, oh yeah, on Bitcoin, like you can experiment in a bunch of different ways, like instead of pushing, like basically creating this altcoin market.
Like that, go to hell, go do something different.
And side chains look a lot like sort of like an innovation lab or like a mad scientist lab or something like that. Or you could think of it as like trying to go to the moon, and like rockets will explode, but we'll make much better rockets. And eventually you get like a Mars mission or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? So I would say and you brought up anti-fragility, whatever, earlier, and I didn't address it, but this is kind of where I'm getting at. It's like, if you allow side chains to exist, even if because it doesn't fit into their like ideology, or it doesn't fit into their like, I don't know, they wouldn't use it, so no one should use it. But it's fine, and they're upset that like they might have to use it if it's like useful. That's a stupid concern. But like a lot of them will explode. A lot of them won't even get off the ground. But if you have a side chain that makes it economically justifies itself and is just like useful and adding value, that will be a good thing. And you won't have many of those, but the ones you have will be like super impressive. And that's why we should do it. And I'm not even telling you like what that side chain will be, because I don't know. But open up the innovation on Bitcoin. And it's not like the DAO hack or like these losses of money Ethereum have like hurt it at all. It's like people love that shit. People are like, oh shit, they're like experimenting with hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, hell yeah, I want to know about that. So it's a story of innovation, and it will be good. But that's a hard sell. Like, it scares computer science people because they want to know like the inputs and the outputs equal this. Whereas I think the position of these side chains and drive chains, like the argument is like to embrace the unknown and to like create this environment where we can like, rub a bunch of sticks together until we get a fire going, but that's not something that computer science people like to embrace.
Well, that rubbing sticks together to get fire is what makes fire. So it'll be hopefully there are people over on your side of it, willing to. The unknown is what life would be so boring if we just knew everything now.
Well, thanks for hearing my additional rant. That's all from me, I would say.
I appreciate it, Dan. Thank you.
I always appreciate talking. One of my favorite things is to talk to lawyers for free.
Well, we didn't really talk about any legal stuff.
I know, it's just funny.
Yeah.
It's just funny to have like free lawyer time. I know it's not lawyer time, but you're a lawyer. You get it. It's funny.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, thank you. And I guess I'll see you in the chat room on Bitcoins. Yep. Thanks. Bye, Dan.
Bye.